Hello and welcome to the Disruptors podcast webinar today, and we're talking with a very interesting panel of strategists at different levels of strategy, from corporate and governance right through to marketing and business strategy. So there'll be something in it for everyone. What's really interesting about these guests is that they have a great breadth of experience and expertise, and I think it's a really hot topic right now, considering what we're going through. Rather than having me introduce everyone, I will have them each introduce themselves by doing what we call a startup introduction, which is who you are, what you do, and why you do it. So I think that's a nice way of starting, with these sort of webinars. But before we do go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm hosting and recording this webinar from the lands of the Darug people. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all today are joining us. And I would like to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in the webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. Great, so maybe I can start with Tracy. So Tracy, maybe you could start by introducing yourself, explaining who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Hello, and thanks so much for having me this evening. I'm Tracy Hamilton, and you can see that down below in my gorgeous little title there. I'm a business strategist, a marketing advisor, and a lifelong eccentric. And my mission is to help incredible people on a mission to do amazing things. So I'm very lucky that then sometimes sees me helping founders, scale-ups and enterprise businesses, all having the ambition to do more in the world.
Brilliant. Karina, can you introduce yourself in the same way?
Hi, I'm Karina Marker. I'm not Tracy. I'm Karina Marker, and I have a boards and governance consultancy called Braben. And what I do is I work with boards and executive teams. I do board performance reviews and related governance services to help lift performance for organisations. The reason why I do it is that I was a lawyer for 25 years doing mergers and acquisitions and governance advice, and I decided I wanted to move out of the emergency room and into preventative medicine for organisations.
Brilliant. Really interesting. And Jai, over to you.
Hi, my name's Jai Smith, and what I do doesn't sound nearly as grown up as what everyone else does. I run an ad agency today, and I've worked in advertising for about 15 years. I do everything from creative strategy through to digital marketing, and I also run a mentoring coaching business on the side. I guess why I do what I do, we just really want to make the world kind of more beautiful, and I think we really try and help small businesses and big businesses just do things that look good and feel good. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Looks like Gavin may actually have dropped out of the broadcast. Hi everyone, my name's Joanne Jacobs. I'm Gavin's I'm Gavin's business partner, and I'm just going to take over because Gavin's disappeared. So who can come back later? So thanks everyone for joining us. Please, if you have any questions in this broadcast, feel free to add them to the YouTube channel that you're engaging with here. But look, we're going to get started with Tracy and asking, before you started with Movio, Tracy, you spent 20 years with creative and social and media agencies on a global level. How has strategy changed over time? What do you think is different now from what went before?
I think that you're kind of putting clues to our age here, Joanne. However, in the early days, strategy was really about a plus. It was a value add. It was added to the stack. It was, oh, by the way, here's our amazing thinker. And when it came to selling creative, it was there to sell creative. So from the real shift that I've seen is that we've gone from being a value add to being a value driver. The other thing that you're really starting to see probably in the last 5 to 10 years is extreme deep specialization. So there's very few people that have had the breadth of application that I've had, where they've done media and creative and business strategy, so different domains and applications of strategy. But within each of those fields, you're seeing real specialization, and you'll meet amazing thinkers and doers that, you know, are deep into customer journey mapping, or, you know, medical go-to-market. They'll either be a vertical from an industry group, or they'll be an expert in how you activate and deploy. And I think that's probably the one thing that hasn't changed, that at the end of the day, strategy is really, really simple. It's just decision making. And so I'm super reductive. There's only two business strategies. You're either growing or divesting. And off the back of that business strategy, there's only so many marketing potential decisions to be made, and then so many creative and communication ways of going about things. So although there's been a lot of new folks that have come to market with their specialization, and there's been this shift from, you know, strategy being the value add to the value creator, it's still about decision making at the end of the day. So for me, that's kind of the shift change. As this move has happened as well between value add and value creation, all of a sudden the ability to charge and ask for thinking has changed. So in the domain of communications planning, when you're a value add, you weren't asking six figures for your point of view. And now we see accounting practices basically playing in this billable hours space for thinking around how marketing and communication strategy might create business conversion and impact. And there's a cost to be paid for that expertise and advice.
Super interesting. One of the things that you brought up early on there was...
Oh, welcome back.
Thanks. It's like magic, isn't it? The idea of specialist versus generalist, and whether that's a thing that is a cycle, or do you think it's going to stay for a while?
One of the things that's super neat is when you are able to say something like this does something like that. So there is a real capability in being able to run interference and speak of the different verticals, the different specializations. So being able to go, the overarching business objective is growth, and the marketing strategy looks like this, and under the marketing strategy, the communications, creative, individual strategic decisions look like this. And within that, we need a fleet of incredible humans who can do these types of things. I think these types of things requires expertise, skill and craft, but also the ability to run that interference across the line. And you'll see that as well as you start to play engage customers, that you'll go into a client organization and they'll use the phrase digital transformation, buzzword, hashtag moment. And in one division, what that actually means is channel migration, which is all of a sudden we're going to switch on mobile banking. That's transformation. And then in people and culture, it means that I'm going to let you bring your own device. And at the CTO level, it actually means an entire investment of $20 million in deep infrastructure. And so the semantics around what those words mean in practice, and being able to run the red thread, which is business strategy goal is this, but in your team, you talk about it in this way. By the way, over there, they talk about the same thing, but they use these words. So definitely specialists, yes, but generalists, yay, you're actually really useful humans. You are the most clever problem solvers.
Oh, there's hope for us all yet.
And for those of us that are curious and, ADHD by bias, that we like to learn a lot of new things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We did a project a few years ago now with the Department of Defense, and we found exactly the same problem, or exactly the same challenge, which was really what they were doing was digital transformation, but it was large scale infrastructure. It wasn't the kind of the fun transformation stuff. It was hard and difficult and nothing worked. And it was a lot of change management.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you kind of have to go with the flow with everything, I guess. Okay. So I was just thinking also in terms of this kind of discussion and this kind of situation, particularly now at the moment where we've got COVID and we're sort of struggling with new ways of doing things. And this is why we have the New Ways series to try and think through how this all fits together. What we find is that we need to find pathways. We need to find ways to navigate. And recently I was passed on a report that Karina and one of her business partners had put together. And this board research that you did and the paper on governance was fascinating. And I think, I guess I was a little bit surprised that some of your key findings were not what I was expecting them to be. Maybe you could explore some of those key findings for us.
Thanks, Gavin. To give some background to the research, my colleague Brian Freestone with Art Talent and I, we'd been talking, there'd been lots of research around the impacts of COVID on business and on society, but there hadn't really been much talk about the impact on boards and directors. So we saw there was a gap there. So in June and July, we spoke to directors in Australia, the US and the UK, and the organisations ranged from ASX listed, New York Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, through to private groups, governments, not-for-profits. And we wanted to see, you know, how they'd been impacted by COVID. There's a link we can share with you so you can see the full report, which, although it's long, there's actually one page that has the digestible key developments. And there are also questions for boards to help you think about these things in context. But to summarise, there are kind of three buckets our findings went into. One bucket was governance structures, another was people, and the final one is one that we said was governance of operational settings. So if we try and look at each bucket just briefly, for governance structures, we were looking at how decisions were made. So there was a clear importance for corporate purpose and values to provide a framework for directors. There was a nuance to looking at risk and risk indicators, and there were real improvements in information flows and how information was given to the board. So for generating strategy, it's, as Tracy was saying, to take that top level, it was to get people out of the weeds. It was in you know, there's so much rapid change, so much risk, and it's getting them out of the weeds to think more clearly and strategically, even as they're trying to keep the lights on.
Yes.
So then on the people side, there was a new transparency. It was pretty clear who could do what and who couldn't do what. And it was also very clear what stress management's been under and management fatigue. So the takeaway I see for that is that there's going to be succession planning moved right to the top of the agenda as we look for skills currency. And from a strategy, and from a strategy perspective, I think that that's going to be especially relevant because the same way that people want to understand finance and have to understand finance, even if they're not an accountant, but they're on a board, it's relying on each other's skills in order to build a base knowledge across a board when it comes to innovation and particularly technology, which has been thrown to the fore in the pandemic.
Indeed. Ah, cool. Very interesting. I think that's the being able to connect the dots between different capability sets is the real challenge in this. And Jai, I know that this is something that you're doing in terms of building and exercising the strategy muscles of like young strategists. But are you seeing that sort of filter upwards as well?
What do you mean by tilted upwards, sorry?
Oh, filter upwards. So you build the capacity and then
what does that mean? Look, I think strategy certainly in advertising is changing in the sense of like I agree. I was really listening to what Tracy was saying in terms of like about picking paths and dissolving things until you can see the way to go. And I think what we're trying to do from a reverse point of view is there's a level of inspiration and spark we're trying to push back into strategy, which is, if we really go back to its roots, you know, in the advertising world I'm talking about, it's really about sparking creative. And it is about justifying and rationalizing decisions. But, you know, if you asked anyone, what's the strategy around an ad campaign, it's a one sentence answer. If you ask it around a board strategy or a business strategy, and, you know, I used to sit in dozens of meetings when I worked with PwC, it's a much longer answer. And you think the more words people are putting in here, the better, you know, this is going to come out. And it's just not really the truth. And so what we're trying to do at a kind of a younger level or a new age strategist kind of point of view is come back to, how does strategy allow you to make leaps of faith that no one else can? And I totally agree. As soon as you say innovation, as soon as you say transformation into what? And sparking creative to do what? Those kind of leaps need to be much more insight driven, much more qualitative, where you kind of suck the science out of it. And a lot of the things that we're doing is there's a big pushback on, you know, customer research, you know, led by the likes of Adam Ferry and things, who say, if you just keep asking the customer and your stakeholders what they want, they'll just tell you what they know. And it's a really dangerous part that brands and businesses, you know, from a transformational or a business point of view, just end up being the same as everybody else. So I think what we're trying to do is really challenge what people consider strategic decisions and how they're made.
I love that. I think that's like an interesting segue to maybe bounce back to you, Karina, around how do we bring creative decision making? How do we, and Tracy, feel free to chime in here too, this idea of how do we drive strategy from that creative aspect? Because I think often when we talk strategy, it feels a bit boring and a little bit like it's very risk heavy. But of course, the downside of risk is if you don't take risk, then you also can create risk.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. And if I think of it like rock climbing, you can think of the rope that people belay off. And I should say I would never rock climb because I'm me. But you think of it, and there's a safety rope there. You can think of it as it stops me from falling, or you can think of it as it helps me get to the next level. So 100%. If you're trying to create the right environment for creative thinking, I think one of these things, drawing back to that thing of expanding your skill sets and diversifying your skill sets, I think there's a chance for transformation because of the way that management and board dynamics have changed by necessity with COVID. And so the traditional model is you've got management who comes up with a strategy and then board tweaks it and plays with it and moves around it and whatever. It all depends where you are in the life cycle of your business and whether you're, keeping lights on, stabilizing, or, planning for the future. I think with the changes in dynamics, there's a greater ability for creative thinking as you can unlock the value of senior people, board directors who've lived through crises, that have skills that other people don't, link that to new skills. So one of our directors actually said he only left executive life 9 years ago, and he says, my skills are not current. It's been 9 years, I am not current. So I think that change in dynamic can help unlock the creative thinking around it.
Interesting. Tracy, I'm just wondering if that resonates with you.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that, and it's really interesting. I had an amazing conversation yesterday with an incredible first Australian thinker, and she shared a beautiful perspective about resilience in her community, and that COVID is a speck. It's a speck compared to the 60 million years of lived experience that's sitting inside them from a somatic perspective. And I'm hoping my lighting is great, but I tell you what, my first redundancy was during this Y2K, followed by the GFC. So all of a sudden, when you look at needing to rebound and recreate and survive, you've got muscle memory there. And so this is one of the things around, pardon the phrase, but intergenerational exchange, is that there is incredible, impressive, passionate humans who may be in their late 70s, 90s and beyond, or inversely, like some of the awesome work that Gav's doing lobbying his emerging talent in his impact work. And I hear, as Jay's talking about working with young strategists, I'm super jealous. Gorgeous, fresh, young, yummy thinking that can be harnessed to really create perspectives. And so if we go back to, you know, my really simplistic view, which is strategy is just decision making, to work out the problems to solve, you've just got to be super curious. And so it comes back down to, you know, some of those really great things of forensic planning, which is there's a body, why is it dead? Let's actually unpick all around it, you know, Mr. Mustard in the drawing room. And so these types of skills are the things that, you know, you're born with. This is the innate curiosity that we need to continue to bring into that conversation. Yeah. And I'm loving that wonderful insight from you, Karina, which makes me feel super optimistic about where we're at, because I know that from a Australian tech startup perspective, scale-ups and startups are really struggling sometimes with that interrelationship with the board, which is then inhibiting their scale ambitions. So it's like this kind of judicious, dubious, you know, slowly catchy monkey, particularly if you've come from a fully share-held, you know, deliver solid returns, not so interested in alpha. I'm sitting on a board that's a tech board because I want to be perceived as being a bit cool. You know, so that value exchange. Oh.
And that's it. Yeah. You know, like, having sat on a couple of boards, and I'm getting involved in another one shortly, it's interesting to what the founders, especially younger founders, look to their boards to do, because strategy is a word that gets thrown around a lot. Generally, I find, and again, you can shut me down, I find people sitting around that board talk about strategy in every other breath to say this is the decisions we're making day to day, week to week. Whereas where I think we need to change that is there's a point where it's just doing business, and yeah, you're going to change your mind every week, and you know, we're adapting to COVID, and is this still our strategy? Is our strategy to grow or because and again, not to play semantics, but for me, when we talk about growth or diversify, they're objectives. For me, strategy is more creatively, how do we get to those objectives? Because I agree with you know, you got two decisions to do in business all the time, and what we're trying to do is get our founders to ask different questions of the board, which aren't, am I doing the right thing? Do we have enough money? Can I get more money? You know, when will we know we've got enough money? Because that's not strategy. That's just the result of doing things. And, you know, when we're looking at it, you know, there's some great experienced people. And I love you talking about, you know, like you meet somebody who's 60, 70-year-old, you know, and my grandfather, you know, worked for, the gambling company. I've left it. Anyway, doesn't matter. You know, who made poker machines, and like listening to his stories. He's 95, aristocrat, and like I'm like some of the stories he tells me, I'm like, what is this nonsense? But it's all the other stories he has about these human decisions, these interactive decisions that I'm like,
he knows all about behavior and gamification.
Because that's more interesting. It's like, what are those human interactions that we can actually use to drive business, right? So if we look at some transformation, I worked for a large property firm last year who won a culture transformation. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? Do you want some new wallpaper that says trust, integrity, honesty? You know, I'm like, are you going to say you're not these things at some point? Like, what's the point here? And then we really got down to what their strategy needed to really be focused on is you think you have a boring job, but you want to tell the world you don't. And as soon as it got down to that, everyone relaxed because we just said what we're all meant. And I'm like, okay, that's our strategy. Cool. Everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, can we write that on the slide? Like, oh, we should dress this up. And I'm like, don't dress it up. And it's something that happens a lot of the time in strategies. Like, we need numbers to that love that safety rope I don't climb either. I think it's a
Yeah.
nonsense sport for nonsense people. But you know, that rope can either be your data and your numbers and your slides to say, look, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. But if you still miss, and if you don't have the strength to grab that next boulder, I assume, like, you're still going to fall. And I think that's where all the numbers and the strategy in the world can't save you if your creative's no good. And I'm the strategist. I'm not trying to be the creative at this point.
So that's really interesting. So I used to be a climber, Jai. So
That's another conversation.
another conversation. But what's really interesting about climbing, and I also love that metaphor, because the reason that you put in a piece of protection that isn't going to hold, if you know it's not going to hold, we call it psychological protection, because it means that it might hold. And if you're an optimist like me, then that seems like a great thing to do. So it gives you a little bit more confidence to reach for it, because even if it is a bit too far, it allows you to push yourself that a little bit further than you otherwise might. And I think that's part of what strategy does. And it's partly also what, if we have these conversations at all different levels of our organization, and that's why I was kind of interested to have this conversation around junior strategists in working in brands and marketing, because they come up with these amazing ideas. And it's largely to do with that they don't get to play at that sort of senior level, that they don't contribute to strategy at like a board level, for example. But it doesn't mean that those ideas or their approaches are less valuable. It just means that there's no seat at the table. So I think finding ways and pathways in around that is a super interesting thing to do.
There's a word you just used in terms of like how being sure about something or having that psychological security. There's a great new podcast out called the Mojo Sessions, and Gary Birtwistle interviewed a guy named David Marquet. He was the captain of a nuclear sub. I think the book's called Turn the Ship Around. And he said his whole reframing of like a military situation was to stop asking, are you sure? And start asking, how sure are you? Because no one's sure. And we kind of make it up. And he's like, if I can do that, you know, in the Navy, then anyone can do it. And he's like, and that's how you shift that power, especially on being a board, from I know all the answers and I'm just hiding them from you till you ask me the right question, to I trust you and, you know, quote unquote, I empower you. You know, when I say that, I mean, if you screw it up, it's your fault. But anyway, changing that language to how sure are you, 50, 60, 70, 80%, can really change that.
Interesting.
And in the work I do, I look at what are the enablers of your strategy. And invariably, people and risk are in the enablers of your strategy. People, it's pretty obvious that they're the arms and legs of your strategy. And so when you're looking at things like corporate purpose and values, you need to make them really simple. If there's someone who's sitting in a box being a bank teller or something, that person who's facing your customer, it's shades of grey. It's just compliance. It's just a checklist. You can't have a whole page-long thing of these are our values and our purpose is this complex thing and we're going to do this and that. They need to have a moral compass in everything they do. And that's lived strategy. That's strategy not being an artifact. That's strategy actually working through all levels of your organisation. And to pick up Jai's point, with risk as an enabler, get your business units involved in setting your risk levels. Let that be your peg that helps them move forward so that they've got the comfort to move forward. Because one of the other findings out of our report was just the changes to management and director dynamics and interactions, and particularly as everyone talks about the pace of execution, it's people have been given the confidence to execute. We're not saying forget all your standards, but they've been given real confidence to move on good and perfect later.
I like that idea. And Tracy, I'm just thinking about on that topic, you know, if we're thinking about how we move from good to, you know, get to perfect later, is there still hope in these times for growth and strategies that drive growth?
I'm an optimist, so that's my bias. And my muscle memory says absolutely. And one of the most wonderful things is there's no need for me to start a conversation, a provocation about, let me talk to you about the future of work. Or let me tell you about, I've been pitching transformation digital and mobile for 15 years. And I remember trying to sell RFID when it first was launched. Finally, COVID gave me an application that just meant that within a week, every single hospitality venue in Australia had adopted that technology. And so it comes down to the two phrases I used was growth or divest. So are we growing this business or are we selling it to someone else? So diversification might fit within your growth strategy. But what's the problem we're best at solving is what you need to be able to answer. My kind of qualifying questions are always, what's the problem we're solving for today? Why does it exist? However, when we're in this mindset and when we're in this moment, it's about being really focused. What's the problem we are best at solving right now? For whom? It's like so many folks will always rock on up with a great utility. I've done this. This is incredible. I've got this new reg tech thing. Trace, can you scale it? We want to launch in 200 countries. How do we tell the narrative? And I'm like, for whom? And what's their current behavior? And why does that not work? And what's the alternative? Does anyone give a darn? And what's the business model? But also the kind of real telling thing when it comes to moving from talking and doing, because yes, I've had a career that included very, very gorgeous global platforms with, hundreds of countries that had executions and big creative platforms and nice juicy budgets, but also a whole bunch of keynote therapy. You'll pay me, I'll write your beautiful presentation, you feel validated, particularly when I'm going in after BCG or McKinsey, who have done an amazing job of actually qualifying some decisions, but the company then hasn't been able to move forward. So the question I'll always ask is, what happens if we do nothing today? And if you go, when you start to see this thing going off the shoulders, uncomfortable actually. I go, cool. Let's come back when you're ready to do something awesome. And so again, what does your strategy and action look like? So yes, growth is possible right now. Yes, it's very clear. If you can connect a problem that isn't being solved well in your category or isn't being solved at all, that's relevant to your customer, then get on with it and articulate it crisply in simple language. We do this for these people because, and that kind of consistency as well that Karina started to touch on. Values and action, it's like parenting. It's all about, mirroring behavior, which is, I can't come on and give you a gorgeous brand strategy, a big platform that says, we rock, we're amazing, we're such good humans, if the guy at the top is not doing the right thing. And so that kind of consistency of behavior right down into the supply chain, which is, you guys say that you're committed to carbon reduction, and yet all of your superannuation goes into
fossil fuels. Yeah.
Let's talk about it and let's shine a light on it. So if you want growth, it's there. Find a problem, solve it, articulate that value. Make sure if you're going to make a promise to the market, don't keep it. Keep it. And communications isn't just a juicy Band-Aid. It's not something that marketing does. It's something, brands are verbs, in every way that they touch, see, think, feel, do. Here's an opportunity to actually create, do well by doing good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've got some questions starting to come through. And if you do have questions and you're tuning in, please drop them into the chat channel. And you can see that Gil's asked a question, which is that COVID has completely upended remote working. How does strategy change if you can work in New York from your lounge room in Australia? And equally, how to compete against much cheaper offshore staff?
Well, I can answer that one. Having relocated,
you have just done this.
Having run global strategy out of Singapore into every sort of market for 12 years, and then relocating to Sydney during bushfires. Great thinkers can do great things from anywhere. And that's the magic of beautiful, curious humans. You definitely need to be incredibly resourceful when you're turning over ethnographic, cultural, anthropologic rocks, and have amazing teams and networks in market, or the ability to scrape and bring data back in. The thing that's really great about Australia is that we have some really wonderful multicultural talent who are native speakers who can actually look at nuance of language when you're scraping information. But equally, how do you compete against much cheaper offshore staff is again around value. What's your value proposition? What's the problem that you're incredible at solving that no one else can? And so being able to articulate your personal value proposition is just as critical as someone who's looking to be a global strategist and work from anywhere as it is being a brand connecting to value in the market.
Karina, what about you? What does this pandemic mean for governance, and is there an opportunity that this has been forced upon us?
Oh, there's definitely an opportunity that's been forced upon us. If you're looking at the positives that have come out of it, it's just such a shocking time. It feels embarrassing to talk about positives, but there are positives in the governance space because it's had to sharpen the mind of people in a whole range of areas. I spoke about corporate purpose, for example, and values, and we've talked about how that cascades through organisations from the top to the bottom. As we're seeing playing out, that's a critical for all businesses at the moment. So I think it's highlighted that. And what was really surprising to me when we were talking to directors for our research was their surprise at saying we are constantly making ethical and existential decisions, which is not something you usually hear. Like if I do a board performance review, you will ask, do you feel you're an ethical board? And of course, people say, yeah, we're an ethical board. The same, and they mean it. In the same way we all give ourselves a 7 out of 10. If someone says, how are you going? Oh, I guess I'm doing well. I'm about a 7 out of 10. So the positive that we have for governance is that this is now opening a longer term view because they're having to make these ethical and existential decisions. Longer term means you start looking at sustainability, you start looking at benefits for broader stakeholders, things like the banks offering the mortgage freeze, the mortgage holidays. That is a perfect example of taking that long-term view. So you hope that will improve. Other positives are a more nuanced understanding of risk, because especially having the dispersed workforce, you need to think far more carefully about your risk correlations and things. The stronger these organisations can be about being forward-thinking, sustainable, sound, so they keep people employed and they don't go out of business and they're not harming people, they're all positives for governance. And at a very personal level, this dynamic that we've all been speaking about of management and the board changing, the directors I spoke to, they had such genuine concern for the management fatigue. So that understanding of each other's perspectives, I think there's nothing but positive coming out of that.
Interesting. I was listening today to a very interesting podcast, and it was featuring the new book by Dan Heath, which is called Upstream. And what they're talking about there is not solving the problem that's right in front of you, because that one is the same one over and over again, but you need to go upstream. So you need to be strategic in terms of solving a problem. But often one of the challenges we have is that we're so busy solving today's problems, we can't look at tomorrow's. And this is something that I guess, from a marketing perspective and from that sort of forward-thinking creative perspective, Jai, that that we're teaching and training young strategists to look into the future. How do you think that is playing out now? Do you feel like there's additional pressure on people looking that far ahead?
Like, in a sense, yes. Agencies are kind of, unfortunately, I heard today that another big agency, is halving its staff again. I think what is difficult is people, strategists in particular, but kind of young creative talent as well, aren't really familiar with how to get themselves out there. So again, if we use that famous phrase, future work, we think about a diversified workforce, we think about the gig economy, we think about people needing to promote and market themselves. We don't really have the tech or the platforms on board yet to kind of give people the opportunity to engage with different pieces of work. And who it does favor are really young, brash kids who I really like to work with, who are like super good at what they do, really super extroverted, and probably a pain in the ass for management, but they have what it takes and they've got potential. Those guys are really easy to work with. You can kind of mold them, you can kind of keep them on a steady path. But who I really think about and who I'm trying to really solve for at the moment for our coaching business, like the Your Good Get Better business, is a lot of designers, a lot of deep creative thinkers, I'll call them, and deep creative kind of practitioners are incredibly introverted. And I think they're nervous about how to do a career projection in a world that no longer has to 3+ years, which again in our world is a long time in an agency. So I think that's the biggest shift, is how do all these individuals represent themselves, market themselves, get paid their value, and actually start to establish those steps that were once in front of them. If I was a designer, I had an art director, a senior art director, I have a creative director, all these people I can learn from. I can kind of see my path in this agency. I learn the tools, I learn the politics, I learn the clients. Hey, man, I'm a creative director. I don't think that's going to work the same way. And that's where I'm really nervous in terms of COVID splitting people. And even though a lot of those personalities are more introverted, what we discovered setting up the agency this year is that no one could do the kind of work we could do coming together. And, we work in a super COVID safe environment, but it was just impossible. Like we do a logo a week to really boil it down, or a website a week as well at the moment. And it's like, how are we conveying all these things? Like, yeah, Zoom will work, but it's not. It's so much more empathy than that. And you've got to have empathy for the people who are on the tools, because they don't get a look in. So, even I'm a bit funny about doing webinars. I think I've told you, like, I shut down our whole workshop system because I can't do it. I can't feel that presence. And I'm not a big, art teacher, woo-woo type, but I just can't engage with it. And I know a few other workshop facilitators have talked to have felt it. So short answer, I think career projection is hard. I think agencies don't know how to keep their people in line, and I don't think they know how to do a culture that's disconnected.
Culture. So Tracy, I was just thinking as Jai's speaking, we're looking at this idea of, and there was a question that came through in the channel, which is about how do we give people hope, and how do we connect them in the right way to culture and to hope in a way that gives them a forward plan and a sense of purpose in their career development.
Yeah, awesome. Again, like, hats off and complete envy that you've got, hands-on amazing humans to nurture, nourish, and hold space for, right?
You can come in the office, Tracy.
I think
we'll
that there's, I can see some real humans and touch them. Watch out.
We might have to talk to HR about you touching everyone, but we'll get there.
Appropriately distanced. I'm repurposing selfie sticks because they're actually the right level of spacing.
That is not what I thought you were going to say. You were doing the selfie sticks. But anyway, different podcast.
Anyhow, that's another podcast for another day. When I came out of 20 years of enterprise grade, creative media, matrix, holding company, amazing human ad agency life, and I went, why do I not feel equipped for the future of work? How can I not feel creative when I've had this great privilege to work in the commercial creative industries for most of my adult life? What the heck? And the productization of, the beauty, the empathy, the incredible art and thinking that goes behind producing communications to achieve business outcomes, really is, that's blood, sweat and tears poured into, you know, those moments that sometimes don't even make the cutting floor. And one of the things that I've been fighting for the last sort of 4 or 5 years is a real understanding of self. So this is my little woo-woo moment, which is my experimentation and the work that I did, where I did research with small children who were 4 and 5, ethically, in a child-directed play space where I ran maker labs with pom-poms and circuits and hot glue guns with an incredible team who were very generous and trusting in allowing me to participate in their play space. You know, young humans are born incredible, able to solve problems in the most outrageous, interesting, relevant and novel ways, like just incredible. And when you give them great agency, which is to hold space for their thinking and their problem solving, whew, watch out world. And some of the most breakthrough thinking really is about understanding that those wonderful humans can solve problems wherever they're at if you can just create that opportunity for them. And so I started to go, well, if children are wonderful, then what's going on with undergraduates? Because undergrads, 17 and 18-year-old students then come to ad agencies looking for work. And so I'm like, all the interventions we were playing with, 17-year-olds were already fully inhibited. And so they'd already started to have a shell of self-doubt. And so, gosh, by the time they were, let's call them adults, not grown-ups, you know, we're a work in progress here. How on earth was I going to get adults to unlearn to relearn? And this has sort of been my mission for the last 4 or 5 years, is working out what are the interventions and systems that can help people really flourish. And so my first kind of line of defense, even if I'm taking on a commercial growth brief, is to actually dig in and look at foundational self-knowledge, so that every single person that arrives at the table today knows what their superpower is, which is my big bouncy word, but what your strengths are. So my bias is positive psychology. I study under the amazing Marty Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. He is incredible, and his students have included Angela Duckworth, who talks about grit, you know, Scotty Kaufman, who's an amazing thinker on creativity, and Adam Grant, who's one of the, you know, renowned experts in organizational culture change and strategy, you know, and there he is in his late 70s, still pacing the floor, you know, running lectures. And so for me, that bias around what's your superpower, by knowing what you bring to the table every day and then defending it and protecting it and nurturing it, nourishing it, but also being able to have the words to say, hey, boss, this is how I tick, this is what I need, is to really own the space that you're in. And this is one of those skills that, you know, we look to, if you're a parent, you know, guess what? Maybe it's not your job to be the executive vice president. Maybe your job is to actually model amazing behavior so that we've got more incredible humans. And so that's kind of the question I ask myself every day is, I might advocate for certain things for adults. How do I show up in my house? You know, so, you know, if I'm on a con call and my kids need me, what am I doing? Am I acknowledging them? If I understand that I have a child that has a need to sing, oh my gosh.
Don't we all?
You know, how do I nurture that? And so, you know, that what's your superpower and how can you use it every single day? The other piece of the puzzle, and this is where the bravo is the work that the two of you are doing in particular. And Karina, I would love to hear your perspective on getting emerging talent onto boards and what level of readiness is. You know, I started my first business when I was in my early 20s. Sometimes, guess what? An amazing adult will hold space for you and give you a red hot go. And so this is often the case with great rebels and change makers, is that they got there through amazing humans just cheering them on from the sidelines. I feel like I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey there. So
That's all right.
It's your job to shepherd me back.
That's all right. One of those things that, as you're sort of saying that, exactly one of the things we've been doing with the By board for probably the last 10 years that I've been involved has been to have youth representatives on the board. And so it's a youth organisation, so making sure that we've got youth representatives who are coming in and, at first they're a little bit reticent, but then after they've been there a couple of months, they start to really participate in meaningful ways. And we've found that it gives them better pathways into other things as well, as they progress. But I think key to that is creating space, but also creating language. So giving them the skills and the language and some of the confidence around that language to meaningfully participate. And that sort of brings me, to Jai, who has been working on a set of cards around strategy. And one of the things I really love about it is it gives us a way of speaking about strategy in a way that we can all share the same language and use the same sort of meanings, but also still be creative with it. So maybe you could talk, Jai, a little bit about what you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. So in the strategy field, there is an addiction to frameworks and to templates. And I mean, literally, we teach strategy by, hey, here's 6 frameworks to do comms or something else. And what I found was over the last, again, show my own age, 15 years, almost there, was that I kind of keep asking the same questions, but I just get better at asking them. But also I found that I got something you said before, Trace, around like the difference between think and do. And another great strategy mentor of mine, Katie Chatfield, really used to push that. So what I did was I actually put the 99 best questions I had into like this deck of massive playing cards, because instead of using a template and a framework, this is at the office, by the way, today, because I forgot the cards because I'm an idiot, and he'll show them in a minute, was that you can actually use these to break out of the template thinking. And I'll just go to the bit where it actually shows it out. But basically every card, where is it? He's going to show them in a minute, has like a question on it. And all the questions have a framework in the back of it, but I won't show you what that is because that kind of ruins it. But that's kind of the idea, is that you can play these cards, you can play in a group, and it challenges your thinking. So the way we kind of suggest to do it is, if you're in a team or on a Zoom call, and again, these purely are analog. I didn't want to do something digital because I think that's boring. And they're beautiful. They're gold and they're matte black. And so you sit around, and if you've got 5 cards each, when the brief or the challenge comes up on the screen, you can actually then go, who's got a card to play? So some of the questions might be around, what does our audience first think of when they wake up in the day? It might be around, what's that tipping point between think and do? What would our competitor do? What would someone outside the category actually be able to do that actually would shape this thinking? And so they're completely free form. And actually the biggest negative feedback we've got is some people are like, I don't really know how to use them. I'm like, that's kind of the point, but also like, let me show you some ways you can actually use these, because rather than getting like addicted to like frameworks and templates and thinking, if strategy is paint by numbers, rather than thinking, how do I use lateral thinking? And again, no one talks about lateral thinking anymore when they talk about strategy, but how do I make blue mean white? And how do I make white mean sheep? Like, how do you really push your lateral thinking when you're actually trying to come up with something creative? Or if we talk about culture and values transformation and environment transformation, what are we not thinking about? Why aren't we just, so many times I see people do like an environment transformation, so like change what your office looks like. They just Google cool offices. They don't go and stand in spaces that they don't stand in normally. Like, go stand in a skate park if you're really interested in having graffiti, and you'll realize you have no idea what graffiti looks like. And so there's 2 things I hate in an office. Every time there's chalk on the walls in some design that no one's ever going to do again, or graffiti because someone said it was a good idea. Because you've never seen graffiti in 2020. It's still like this weird 1990s stuff. And 2, no one wants chalk in their wall. So like, go and make it look like, don't do the coffee shop thing that's been done to death, but go and find spaces that you don't normally inhabit. And go to a cabin, stay in the woods, find things that change your thinking. And that's what this is designed to do. And so far so good. We haven't officially launched them, but you can buy them at the moment. So if anyone wants it after this, hit me up.
Sounds good. So on that topic, looking into the future, Karina, what do you think we've got? We've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left, but what do we need to be thinking about now as we start to look forward into the future? We're coming, to some sort of equalization here with COVID at the moment, some sort of unhappy alliance maybe. But what do we need to think about, and what do we need to be thinking for?
remembering to stay out of the weeds. That's the thing. Everyone has been keeping the lights on. We just need to stay out of the weeds. We have to keep making decisions and testing to see whether they still make sense against our strategy, rather than just taking the next step and the next step. It's the reason why, although it's been so overdone, especially apologies to the creatives, it's the reason why we called our article Future Focused, because it was this incredible stress that all these directors and senior executives had, and they were just trying to look ahead. So the way to get ahead is to actually look ahead, if that makes sense.
I like that thinking. That sounds good. One of the things that I guess we have to do right now is make hard decisions. Do you think the decisions will get harder, or do you think they'll get easier, or do you think we'll get better at making them?
I think it's all of the above. I think when we spoke to people for this research, it was a really interesting time because they were all at different stages of the pandemic. So we were talking to people in Australia, and we just had the first wave, and they thought they'd made all their hard decisions. And then we spoke to somebody in the US who said the whole board is in a high risk category. So I think what we do need to do is keep strategy as a living thing and not as an artifact, and realise we've just got to keep on testing it, poking it, and each decision that we have to make as the new challenges come up, we're again testing it to see if it's got that internal logic to it.
So does that mean that we're seeing the end of the 5-year strategy?
I think so, yes.
You heard it here first. Okay, so we've got 3 more minutes to go. Maybe just some, if I can just shoot around to each of you, just to give us, 30 seconds on what you think we need to be thinking about, and your insight. What's something that's really struck you recently that you think this is really important to think about when we're thinking strategy? Tracy.
Hi, thank you. Please don't over pivot to what's in front of you. So thinking, using Karen's phrase about being amongst the weeds, when you're standing down 7,000 people, when you've made the biggest loss in your 200-year history, these are what we're faced with right now. And I'd heard the surprising data point that the average tenure of a CMO in Australia is only 18 months. So, we're really in a place of potentially moving into short-termism. Stay the course, understand what the problem you're here to solve is, and keep solving it. Keep listening to your customers. Please, my current soapbox is what happens with a global mindset when your passport's not welcome here. So a huge number of the most incredible businesses in the world were actually founded by refugees, immigrants, and folks from elsewhere. And I know it's nature and the rising conversation around nationalism in so many parts of the world. But if you're not thinking global day one, then you're missing a huge addressable market. And although you might feel that your product or service is best, serving an Australian audience, more likely than not, that same problem is being experienced in the Ukraine, in South America, in Africa. So, please keep your Carmen Sandiego adventure explorer eyes on the prize.
Stay
curious, and let's keep traveling.
Awesome. Jai, what do you think?
Strategy is about making things simpler and better, not anything else.
Good, get better. Keeping it short. Karina.
Think about your people, love your people, as times keep getting tougher and tougher, and think about how your people think. Because if you want to get anywhere, they've got to understand your strategy, no matter what they're doing for you.
Brilliant.
Really well.
That's a great way of wrapping. So that's been an hour. So thank you all for your time this evening, and for everyone who's joined us on the live stream. We've been recording this session and we'll be sharing it tomorrow, same address. You can also catch any of our previous panel recordings on the New Ways series over at theair.works/New Ways. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and let us know if we can help your audience convene, create, and collaborate on our platform, the Airworks. And thanks and good night, and we'll see you again soon next month. Bye for now.
Bye.